Now we have the lecture of development of cardiovascular system part 2. I'm Assistant Professor Dr. Inas Fadil Kadam, College of Dentistry, University of Baghdad. First of all, now we have the formation of cardiac loop, which is began as the heart will be elongated and bent at the day of 23. The cephalic portion of the tube bends ventrally, caudally, and to the right, while the atrial, the caudal portion, shifts dorsocranially and to the left. This bending creates a cardiac loop. The cardiac loop will completed by day of 28. So it is began at 23 day and will be completed at 28 day. How? By bending of the heart on the cephalic portion ventrally, caudally, and to the right, while the atrial portion dorsocranially and to the left. While the cardiac loop is forming, there will be a local expansion become visible through the length of this tube, which is the atrial portion that is initially a paired structure outside the cardiac cavity. This expansion will form a common atrium and incorporate it into pericardial cavity, as you see in this picture. As here, at day 23 this expansion of the heart will form what is called the common atrium. What formed a common atrium? This is the 23 day expansion of the heart tube. So later on, the atrioventricular junction narrow and form a canal called atrioventricular canal. This canal connects the common atrium and the early embryonic ventricle. So we have a connection between the atrioventricular area. There will be a narrow junction. The narrow junction will form a canal called also atrioventricular canal. What is the function of this canal? Is to connect the common atrium with the early embryonic ventricle. There will be another structure which is called bulbous cordus, as we see in the last picture, which is narrow except for its proximal third. This area of proximal third of bulbous cordus will form a trabeculated part, which is the right ventricle. So the origin of the right ventricle from the proximal third of bulbous cordus. The mid portion, which is called conus cordus, will form outflow tract above ventricles. Now we have a tract of two ventricles of the heart. The distal part of bulbus called truncus arteriosus. This truncus arteriosus will form the root and the proximal portion of aorta and pulmonary artery. As we know from the last lecture, the distal aorta will form it from the blood island, while now the proximal aorta will form it from the truncus arteriosus, and the origin of the pulmonary artery also from the truncus arteriosus. So the junction between the ventricle and the bulbous cordus indicated by bulboventricular sulcus, which is a narrow, and then it will be called a primary interventricular foramen. So this foramen is from the bulboventricular sulcus, and it is the junction between the ventricle and bulbous cordus. As we see in this picture, At the end, now what is the result of the formation of cardiac loop? At the end of loop formation, there will be a smooth walled heart tube begins to form. Primitive trabeculated into sharply defined area just proximal to the bulbous temporary smooth wall. The answer is what we have, a smooth wall heart, and there will be a formation of a primitive trabeculate in two sharp defined areas, and the position of this area is proximal and to the bulbous temporary smooth wall. What is this area? The primitive ventricle, which is now trabeculated, and it is called now primitive left ventricle. So the end first of all to area, first of is the primitive left ventricle, and the origin of the primitive left ventricle is the primitive ventricle. The primitive ventricle formed as the end of formation of cardiac loop. The trabeculated proximal third of bulbous cordus, also may call the primitive right ventricle. So the left is from the primitive ventricle. The primitive ventricle is the last the last result of loop formation, while the right ventricle is from the proximal third of bulbous cordus. And the foramen, the primary interventricular foramen, now is formed. So the end result is two area defined and located proximal to the bulbous, which is a smooth wall. First of all, it is called the primitive ventricle to lead to the formation of primitive left ventricles, and the second is the right ventricles, which is primitive also and formed from the trabeculated proximal third of bulbous cortex, and the last is the primary interventricular foramen. The corona truncal portion of the heart tube initially on the right side of pericardial cavity. So now the heart tube is on the right side of pericardial cavity. Then it will be shifted gradually to more medial portion. This change in the portion is the result of formation of two transfer dilation of the atrium bulging on each side of bulbous cordus. So how the atrium will be formed? By the heart tube will be on the right of pericardial cavity. When the heart tube will be shifted to the medial portion, this changing will be formation of the dilation, which is transfers, and this dilation is called atrium, and then the atrium will bulging on each side of bulbous cordus. Thank you for your listening.